happening? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This would typically be the preview edition, going over some races for this upcoming weekend. Keep that in mind as we go forward here. But we were in part 3 of a 4-part series going over the Kentucky Derby point standings 1 through 20. The first 2 parts are already up. You can go and find those over on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. Wherever you listen to any of this stuff, please rate, review, and subscribe. And wherever you subscribe, make sure your notifications are on so you get everything that DRFTV has to offer. As I said, those first 2 parts, you can find those everywhere else. We went through 1 through 5, 6 through 10. Today is going to be 11 through 15. Next Tuesday, typically the recap is on Mondays, but because of it being Derby week and scheduling gets a little bit jacked up, I moved mine over to Tuesday as opposed to Monday. So Tuesday is when numbers 16 through 20 will come out as far as this preview is concerned. And then on Thursday next week, I will go over in the traditional preview edition, the Kentucky Oaks as well as the Kentucky Derby. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can either send them directly to me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt or directly beneath the video player on the YouTube channel. I'm usually pretty good at taking a look at some certain things. Occasionally respond if somebody has a question or a comment, whatever else it may be. So here we go, 11 through 15 here. The horses will go over in order: Improbable, War of Will, Long Range Toddy, Tax, and Cutting Humor. Those will be the 5 that are covered here on part 3 of this 4-part pod going over the Kentucky Derby point standings. Again, the only reason I'm going in this order is because it's just an easy way for me to go through all the horses. It's not based on who I think is better or worse or whatever else it may be. It's just a nice, neat way to go through all 20 of the horses that are scheduled to be running the first Saturday in May. At this point now, just about, 10 days away, give or take a day or 2, depending on when you're listening to this. So let's get right into it. Let's go to one of the more intriguing runners in this year's Derby, in my opinion, the Bob Baffert trained Improbable. The third of 3 in this year's Kentucky Derby for Bob Baffert is Improbable, who was a brilliant 2-year-old, and he's been a very good 3-year-old. He just hasn't visited the winner's circle just yet in 2 starts here. Both of them came down at Oaklawn Park. One of them in the Rebel, one of them in the Arkansas Derby. You'll see here what he accomplished at the end of his 2-year-old campaign. He won a Grade 1 race by more than 5 lengths at Los Alamitos, a track that can occasionally be a little bit horse for coursey. Kind of one of those situations where some take to it and some don't. The run 2 starts, I shouldn't say 2 starts, the run prior to the Los Al Futurity is really the important one as it pertains to the Kentucky Derby, because he's at least proven that he can ship into Louisville and run over that main track at Churchill Downs, which is not a given for a number of these horses that will be trying it for the first time. Now, he's come back here as a 3-year-old, and I'm a little bit torn on what I think of this horse. He's one of the ones that I'm having the most difficult time assessing what I think he actually is at this point in his career. Let's go back to the Rebel and we'll take a look at this race. And you'll note he runs into a pretty darn good horse. Improbable's looping up on the far outside in the red with the yellow stars. And he's going to get run over by this horse right here in the white silks. This is going to be Long Range Toddy, who's eventually going to swing out into the outside and get the job done and go and run down Improbable. But keep an eye on Improbable's head right about now. He's got his head angled over looking at the grandstand, and it just feels like he's losing a little bit of focus, which when I look at this the first time through, I go, you know what? Okay, he didn't get it done, but it was his first start off the layoff. Maybe he's still a little bit on the green side, figuring things out, and perhaps he idled when he hit the front. Long Range Toddy runs him down. He was a horse in good form for Asmussen. He's one that we'll talk about here this afternoon. Now, fine enough. Decent starting off point. You think second start off the bench, you're going to get that big forward move. Baffert puts the blinkers on. Now, again, Baffert's one that is not afraid to toy with equipment. He'll make changes when he thinks necessary. Well, based on that run we just saw with his head cocked out to the grandstand, blinkers going on would seemingly be a benefit. First time with Jose Ortiz aboard. The important thing to note about this run in the Arkansas Derby, not only is he trying to run down Omaha Beach, but more importantly for me, is how this race began. Because at the very beginning, leading into the gate, he was not a happy camper. Improbable was. He was finally in the stall and he started kind of throwing a bit of a fit. So I look at that and I go, boy, the blinkers going on, I understand maybe that's not necessarily going to change, or I don't even want to say that. I'm not a horseman. I don't know what that's going to ultimately make an effect as far as the starting gate is concerned. But for him to throw a fit like that and still only lose by a length to a horse like Omaha Beach, he clearly has talent and ability. I'm just starting to wonder, is Improbable still an unfinished project? Is he that kind of horse that the ability is there, no question, but boy, I'm not totally convinced that he's got it all together right now. And that's a little bit dangerous to me going into a race where you'll face 19 other horses going 1.25 miles, granted at a track that you have shipped into and won in the past. But there's just a part of me that says, can he win this race? Absolutely. He's fast enough. But mentally, is it all there? And what's he going to do when there's 170,000 people next Saturday afternoon screaming at him? Is he going to throw a fit? Is he going to be... The blinkers, it sounds like they're coming off. Don't quote me on that. I'm sure you can find many of our Southern California reporters. I'm sure they have that over on DRF.com, but it sounds like in his most recent workout, the blinkers were off. I'm unsure of what to do with this horse. I think he can win. I could also see him finishing somewhere off the board. Improbable. He's very talented. And I do wonder, maybe he's that kind of horse that's going to take a little bit more time. And maybe down the road we get to see the best of him. But right now, he's a very difficult call for me. I think he's very, very talented. Arguably one of the more talented in the field. I just don't know mentally. Is it all there right now? We'll find out here in just a few short days. War of Will is number 12 on the Derby point standings list, trained by Mark Casse. You can see what this horse has done throughout his career. He's really turned the corner ever since being moved over to the main track. Based on pedigree, you would think turf, turf, turf. Well, I thought he ran great races basically in all 4 of his first 4 starts in his career on the grass. Then they moved him over here, and he was awesome winning on a sloppy sealed track at Churchill for the first time on the main track. Comes back awesome in the LeCompte, comes back even better in the Risen Star, in my opinion. Then, unfortunately, the Louisiana Derby happened. Now, this is one of those things that I can't show you any replays for reasons that have gone over before. But the idea that, I loved this horse early on. I still do love this horse. I think he's very, very talented. But I've been making the comparison recently to some friends of Bravazzo. And I'm not comparing them talent-wise. But I do wonder if this is going to be one of those instances where the Louisiana Derby, the ground basically broke from out underneath him. He came back after the race. He was sore. Things just did not go right. There was question about whether or not he'd be able to make the race. The next morning, he seemed to be okay. And they've gone on, and he's been working beautifully at Keeneland ever since. The reason I bring up Bravazzo ran so well in the Risen Star. He came back in the Louisiana Derby, and on the far turn, something looked like it went wrong, and he was basically eased. Then he was gone. Now keep in mind, that race is middle March, late March at best. He didn't have another run until the Kentucky Derby, and he came forward last year, put in a nice middle move, and flattened out. What did he do then? He came back in the Preakness 2 weeks later and nearly defeated Justify. To me, this is, and I'll go out on a limb here. I'm going to sound like a fool for trying to predict the winner of the Preakness before the Kentucky Derby. I could very easily see a scenario here where War of Will runs a really strong effort in the Kentucky Derby. Not quite enough to get there, whether he hits the board or he fades at the end, whatever the case may be. I could see him running a great race, coming back 2 weeks later in Preakness in Baltimore and winning the Preakness, upsetting whoever the Derby winner is. I like everything about this horse. I think the sort of tactical ability that he has is important. I like that he's won at Churchill. He wins on fast. He's won on sloppy. The reason I bring up this Risen Star, and this is the one that I'm going to really kind of key in on, if you're looking for a barometer of how good this horse is. Granted, maybe the field in the Risen Star wasn't great, but look at this chart here, and you can pull this up in Formulator. Take a look and see. These are the top 5 finishers. Limonite, Hog Creek Hustle, Royland, Country House, War of Will. War of Will was basically up on the lead, or close to it, throughout the entirety of the run. Take a look and see where 2, 3, 4, and 5 were throughout the majority. 11th, 14th, 13th, 12th, 9th, 13th, 12th, 11th. Top of the lane, Country House had made up all that ground. But the gist is, these horses came from way out of it. This pace completely melted down. And a horse like War of Will, not only did he stay on, he kept going on. He finished strong. I think that's a sign of a really good horse. He goes out from Mark Casse, who's a great trainer. I do wonder if this race, unfortunately, is going to be his undoing for the Kentucky Derby. But that's my wild and wacky sort of projection and prediction. Let's see how things go, but I have a feeling he'll run a really good race in Louisville. Is it enough to hit the board? Is it, is he going to fade to 6th, 7th, whatever it is? I'm not sure yet. We got to wait and see post positions and things like that. Sounds like he's training well. I wonder if he's going to be just a little bit, he's going to feel the effects of that layoff. Because I don't really think the Louisiana Derby is a race for him, for the most part. I'm just drawing a line through it. If that's the case, I think you're going to have a very fit and ready to go War of Will 2 weeks following the Derby in Baltimore for the Preakness. Just a crazy thought, but you know what? Sometimes you got to go out there and make some crazy opinions, some crazy statements. War of Will. I don't know about the Derby. Really would like him in the Preakness. Hopefully everything continues on along this path. Long Range Toddy is number 13 on the Derby qualifying points list. You see that he most recently ran in the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby. Certainly not his best, but the run 2 starts back in the Grade 2 Rebel, one of the split divisions. This race right here, this is pretty darn good. Finishing ahead of a horse in Improbable, who's probably going to be half of his price come next Saturday afternoon. And you see prior to that, this is a horse that admittedly, he is so much better than I gave him credit for, than I thought he was going to be. I thought he'd be a nice sort of Grade 3 type. He is really taking his game to the next level. We're going to go back and take a look at the Rebel. This was the run where he goes and defeats Improbable. Now, Improbable's got the jump on him on the far outside. Here is Long Range Toddy in those white Horton silks, sitting a beautiful trip in behind horses. He's loaded. He just needs somewhere to go. Eventually, they're going to get a seam, angle him out, and he goes on with it. It's a pretty strong finish for this horse. Now, again, you can kind of say one of two things. It was this horse being determined and going and getting a horse in Improbable. It could also be a little bit of Improbable being a little bit of a goof on the front end, looking around and helping a horse like Long Range Toddy get into it. But having said all that, however you want it, whichever side you want to fall on, you can't argue that this horse ran a good race this day, and he has a little bit of versatility. He's the kind of horse that can come from a little bit farther out of it, or he can get himself into it. And I do think with a faster pace, there's a scenario where he's more mid-pack as opposed to up pushing it. Now, we're not going to show the Arkansas Derby, but there's a couple things here with a horse like this. I'm a big believer in the pairing up of career top buyer speed figures and that perhaps preceding a forward move. And that's exactly what you had from this horse. He earns an 87 here in the Smarty Jones, an 87 in the Grade 3 Southwest. Boom, he jumps up to a 95 in the Rebel. You can look at the Arkansas Derby, the 78 that he earned that day, and say that could have been a bounce from a career top, and now he's going to sort of cycle back into one of his better races here for the Kentucky Derby. Or you can kind of approach it the way that I am. It had nothing to do with the company. We just saw that he can run with Improbable. Omaha Beach, look, he's going to be one of the favorites next Saturday. I'm going to look at this piece right here, the sloppy sealed track. That was the first time he had run over a track with moisture in it, and that to me, look, it could be a concern if you end up with wet weather for the Kentucky Derby, but I'm willing to forgive the Arkansas Derby because really either way you want to look at it, if he gets a fast main track next Saturday, if you believe that the sloppy track is the reason for the dull effort, no problem. You don't have to worry about that. And if you believe he did bounce off of that big effort in the Rebel, and now he's going to sort of cycle back into one of his best here coming off of that in the Arkansas Derby, then you're looking at a good horse anyway. So Long Range Toddy is the kind of horse to me, he's going to be a bigger price. He's going to kind of slip through the cracks a little bit. I don't know if he can win this race, but I'm definitely going to be using him underneath. I could see him finishing second, third, fourth without question. The win is really not totally out of the realm of possibility, if we're being honest, but to me, he is better used underneath. I think Long Range Toddy, again, he's a much better horse than I had given him credit for as a 2-year-old. He continues to impress, and he's won me over. I'm a fan of his. I think Steve Asmussen does a great job. Long Range Toddy, if you don't want to use him on top, I would strongly encourage you to consider using him underneath in any of your exotic wagers. 14 on the Derby qualifying list is Tax going out for Danny Gargan. I find myself rooting for a number of these horses. I think that a lot of them are very likable. I don't know if any of them are superstars. As I've said time and time again, you can't make a definitive statement on any of these horses at this point in the year. We're April 25th. Their careers have got so much more to go, knock on wood, that it's too early to make a definitive statement one way or the other. If you think this is a good group, bad group, great group, terrible group, whatever, it's too early. But a horse like Tax, to me, he's blue collar and he just shows up. He's a racehorse. Sometimes it's good enough to win, sometimes it's not. Look, a shrewd claim. They claimed this horse for $50,000 in his second lifetime start. He debuted for a $30,000 claiming tag. They claim him out of that second run. They bring him right back into the Rems and throw him to the deep end. Acquits himself very nicely at 17-1. Off for a couple months, comes back, wins the Withers with a 96 Buyer. The question with the Withers, he had 3 horses across the wire. The 96 Fig, sure, the Fig looked great, but the visual piece of it, you're unsure. When you got 3 horses across the wire in a dirt race, not usually a sign of the strongest. He comes back off of about a 2-month layoff to run in the Wood Memorial, and he did have a number of things go his way. Here's Tax. He's getting first run on a horse like Tacitus and anybody else coming from the back. And this has been a very, very swift pace up in front of him. So in many ways, he had the run of the race in this part. He's going to angle out right now into the clear and he's going to continue on with it. At this point, Tacitus is starting to find his stride. And he's going to come and eventually run him down as Tacitus leans in on Tax down the lane. The thing I like about this with Tax, though, is this is the kind of running style that he has, and this is the kind of heart that he has. Sure, is he the most naturally talented horse in the race? No, not by a long shot. But the fact that he wants to win and doesn't want to let you buy, That goes so much farther to me in a race like the Kentucky Derby than, just sheer ability, because there are going to be those moments, there's going to be those instances where things don't go ideally for you in a race like this, where you get bounced around out of the gate and when you get confronted at the top of the lane. We've seen more talented horses with less heart get looked in the eye and say, I'm done. No more. I'm good. I'm going to pack it in. Meanwhile, you have other kinds that don't necessarily have the natural ability that the others do, and they dig in because they don't want to lose. It's no different than human athletes. Some with the most talent in the world, doesn't matter. They don't have the heart. Some that are a little bit up against it from a talent standpoint, but they have the drive and the desire to beat you, that goes a long way. Don't overlook that when you analyze a horse race. Tax, to me, fits that bill. He may not be the naturally most talented runner in this race. He may not even be in the top 5 or top 10. But he wants to go out there and beat you. And the distance, I don't think, is going to be a problem for him. And his versatility. Again, you saw that if there's a blistering pace, he's comfortable sitting 6-7 lengths off of it and then commencing a bid. Or if for some reason the pace is a little bit more moderate, he can be relatively close and still go on with it. Tax is the kind of horse to me that I think you're going to get an honest effort out of him. Certainly one I'd be considering in exotics. Again, I don't know if he's quite good enough to win this kind of race, but I think he's going to work out a good enough trip in a spot like this, and he's going to be a giant price compared to the Tacitus's, compared to the, you name it, the Improbables, the Game Winners, the Omaha Beaches, the Roadsters, any of those horses. He's going to be 2-3 times the price of some of those runners. And I think he has every right to get a piece of this thing. Tax, he's a very likable horse. I hope nothing but the best for the connections. We'll find out if he can pass the test, second start off of the bench in the Kentucky Derby next week. Cutting Humor, one of 2 scheduled to enter in the Kentucky Derby for trainer Todd Pletcher. He's number 15 on the Derby points standings. He got there via his victory in the Sunland Park Derby at 1 mile and an eighth. We'll talk about the race more momentarily. A little bit of a quirky horse, Cutting Humor is. He came back, made his seasonal debut in this race down at Gulfstream Park, ran quite well in behind Bourbon War. We know what Bourbon War is capable of. He came back and was a runner-up in the Fountain of Youth. And then unfortunately, just the pace situation didn't develop, and he unfortunately was unable to procure a spot here in the starting gate for the Kentucky Derby. He then shipped to Oaklawn Park to Cutting Humor, and unfortunately for him, he's a little bit of a quirky horse, where if things don't necessarily go the way that he wants them to, he can kind of throw a little bit of a fit, become his own worst enemy, as he did in the Southwest, in a little bit tight, throws his head around, becomes rank, pulls himself up right here in this middle portion nearly to the lead, and he's got nothing left in the tank as the real running begins. Fear not, they bring him back in the Sunland Derby a month later, and this was a big league effort in my opinion. Now, he did have a much more comfortable trip and a much more comfortable position throughout. We'll take a look at the tape right now. He's on the outside right now in the clear. He's getting the jump on a horse like another Twist of Fate in those pink silks, and he's just going to go on with it very professionally. Now, the only thing that you need to be a little bit concerned about, and here I am saying he does it very professionally, John Velasquez even said so after the race, he's going to make the front, and it looks almost like he just throws it into neutral, and it may not look like visually the most impressive finish you've ever seen, but I think part of that is because this horse is, again, a little bit on the quirky side. Another Twist of Fate is coming at him. You know he's a nice horse. Say what you will if you think he's really a dirt horse or not. But the point is, Cutting Humor continues on and gets there and prevails by a narrow neck margin, almost a head. The thing with a horse like this, to me, the quirks in a race like the Kentucky Derby, they're difficult to overcome, where there's a really, really good chance that you're going to get bounced around or you're going to be in tight at one point. And if that happens, how is this horse going to react? Is he going to sort of all of a sudden lose his head and get rank and get speed crazy and pull into the run? If that's the case, then yeah, he's in deep water. But if he can sort of work out a trip, and again, so much will have to do with post position draws and things like that. But I don't think the distance is going to be a problem for him. And if he can somehow finagle a comfortable trip in a 20-horse field, which, again, is almost unheard of, but it has happened before. If he can work that sort of trip out, I think Cutting Humor is the kind of horse that could get a piece of this thing. He's run well enough when things have gone his way. Now, when they don't, we know what happens, the Southwest Stakes. But if he can work out a comfortable enough trip, I think there's talent there. I think there's pedigree there for 1.25 miles. To me, he's mildly intriguing in a spot like this. I'm not suggesting he's going to win this race. I could be talked into using him underneath, but guess what? I feel like I say that about all of these horses. I could be convinced to use them underneath in a superfecta or a trifecta. Cutting Humor, though, goes out for connections that know how to win a race like this with Todd Pletcher. We'll find out from a running style standpoint, where is he positioned, and I think For all these horses, the post position draw is important. I think it's particularly important for a horse like Cutting Humor, who's got a little bit of a quirky nature to him. We'll find out. Hopefully he gets a good draw and he can acquit himself nicely the first Saturday in May. There you have it, numbers 11 through 15 on this year's Derby qualifying list. They are all scheduled to run next Saturday in the Run for the Roses, the Kentucky Derby. I'll be back on Tuesday for the recap, air quotes, edition, although it'll be part 4 of this 4-part series going over the 20 runners that will be in the starting gate, or scheduled to be anyway, for the Kentucky Derby. On Tuesday, we'll go over Win Win Win, Country House, Gray Magician Spinoff, and the Japanese Invader Master Fencer. However you listen to this thing, please rate, review, and subscribe. You can find this in podcast form or video form, basically anywhere. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you have questions, comments, or concerns beneath the video player on YouTube or directly to me on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter as well, at Bernier_Matt. Again, I'll be back on Tuesday, not Monday. Tuesday, going over numbers 16 through 20, and then Thursday next week will be the going back to the traditional kind of preview pod, going over the Kentucky Oaks as well as the Kentucky Derby. Until Tuesday, best of luck this weekend, however you play, whatever you play, wherever you play. This has been the preview edition, but the third part of this 4-part pod looking at the Derby runners for the Matt Bernier Show.